You know, we need to act. These are weapons of war. I'm a Second Amendment guy. I have 2 shotguns. My sons have shotguns. You know, but our states, you know, everybody thinks somehow the Second Amendment is absolute. You're not allowed to go out and own an automatic weapon. You're not allowed to own a machine gun. You're not allowed to own a flamethrower. You're not allowed to own so many other things. Why in God's name do we allow these weapons of war in our streets and at our schools?
Well, that's our commander-in-chief, folks. Look, the great gun debate is going to, as it always has and likely always will be, part of the national conversation ahead of the 2024 election. And we need to know where our Republican leaders stand. Joining me now with his take on that and so much more is 2024 Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, it's great to have you.
It's good to see you, Tommy. How are you?
I'm doing well, other than obviously what we're dealing with here in Nashville, which is exactly where I want to start the conversation tonight. It's no doubt that this gun debate is going to rage on now and into 2024. So I'm wondering, as a candidate, where you stand on it and some of the rhetoric, especially you've heard in the last several days.
Yeah, so I've actually been very clear in the last couple of days. It was a tragedy in Nashville. I think if you want to protect our children, as I think we should protect our children. And I think the right way to do that is to put armed marshals in every one of those schools. I've run the math on this. I'm actually the first Republican candidate who has called to abolish the U.S. Department of Education. That's $83 billion a year spent on an agency that, by the way, foists its toxic agendas onto schools, public schools across the country, using federal funding as a carrot to advance these race and gender ideologies. Well, it turns out for just 25% of that, we could actually put 2 to 3 armed marshals in every school, certainly every public school across this country. That's clearly a better use of funds than what we're doing today. So I think that conflating this with the issue of so-called weapons bans or whatever it is that President Biden's talking about, that's just politicizing this. We have the same number of guns on a per capita basis today as we did 5 decades ago. What's really wrong today is we have a mental health epidemic in this country that we haven't adequately addressed. But in the short run, if you want a short-run solution that protects kids in schools, then protect the most valuable assets of this country, the next generation, more than today we don't even protect them in the same way we protect banks or airports with thousands standing around. That's the acronym for TSA, or any range of other things, shopping malls that will protect more effectively. We ought to actually step up to the plate and say, if we want to protect our children, to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, there's an easy way we can do it. And as U.S. president, with my plan to shut down the Department of Education, that's an important part of what I'll deliver. Now, the other part of this, Tommy, is we have to look at the perpetrator here. I think it is an important part of the conversation to say that this was a transgender individual who likely struggled with other mental health disorders. We can no longer pretend like gender dysphoria is just something that's perfectly normal that we accept versus recognizing it what it is. It is a mental health disorder. When a person engages in a gender transition more often than not, that's a signal that something else is going wrong in their lives. And I reject the idea that it's the compassionate thing to do to somehow affirm someone else's confusion. The real humane thing to do is actually to figure out what's going wrong and to fix it. And anything short of that is cruel, yet that's exactly the culture we live in today.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and there's been a lot of discussion about some of our new laws here in Tennessee that ban drag queens from gyrating in front of children, as well as that gender mutilation for adolescents that you just described. We've obviously taken a lot of heat for that, and now the national conversation really has switched somehow, Vivek, I don't understand, to the conservative Christians who were targeted are now part of the problem, and somehow we deserve this because we went after the trans community. I don't know how the media manages to spin that with a straight face or goes to sleep at night knowing that they're doing it, but that's the reality of the conversation. And speaking of parents and speaking of school choice and these things that are all rooted in what you just discussed, which is the Department of Education and the future generations, how do you think going into 2024, not only yourself, but other Republicans down ballot address this issue and bring more parents into our fold? Because I truly believe this is a bipartisan issue. It's something that independents are going to want to hear from us. And I want to know how we can make sure that we get that message out effectively. I think we've failed to do it for far too long.
Look, I think this trans issue and the issue of radical gender ideology, we just can't dance around that like it's a sacred cow we can't touch. We have to address it head on. Okay, I'll tell you something, fun fact, Tommy, people forget this. You can't get a tattoo by the age of 18 in any of the 50 states in this union. Why? Because we don't want children making permanent decisions that they will regret later in life in the form of a tattoo. And yet now it's become a trend in this country where every time a kid goes through some period of confusion, even a young kid, the thing you're supposed to do as an adult, a teacher, or a parent is to affirm that confusion by engaging in forms of surgery, as you put it correctly, genital mutilation, chemical castration, puberty blockers that, yes, have permanent effects that many of those kids will regret for the rest of their lives. I think that a federal ban on genital mutilation or gender-affirming chemical castration below the age of 18 is perfectly appropriate. I think if we can say the same for cigarettes or for alcohol by the age of 18 or 21, we can absolutely say the same thing with respect to gender-affirming, real genital mutilation surgery before the age of 18 either. Now, I think that parents having more agency and more choice is important in this. One of the complaints you hear is that school choice programs across the country are underfunded. Again, I come back to that $80 billion, really $83 billion price tag that we spend through the Federal Department of Education. Even many people who complain at school board meetings and participate in school board elections, one of the things they can't, I would advise them not to forget, is that the Federal Department of Education at the U.S. government, that's actually responsible for a lot of those toxic agendas. Why? Because many of those school boards are just responding to the economic incentives they're given. They don't get those subsidies from the federal government unless you bend the knee to these new race and gender orthodoxies foisted on these schools by the federal government. That's something a U.S. president can change. And I've unapologetically said, when we shut down the U.S. Department of Education, great, you could take 25% of that. That would fund 2 to 3 school marshals per school. You still have the remaining 75% to work with. That would be more than enough to actually help fund any gaps in true school choice programs across the country. And I do think empowering parents is the right step towards the solution. There's still something wrong in our culture, of course, when many parents themselves, at least some progressive parents, because they're insecure and want to be popular amongst their peers,
Right,
will be among those that also want to affirm their children's confusion. That's something we have to deal with in our culture. Government's not going to exactly deliver the answer to that. But part of this presidential campaign is a cultural movement to revive the answer to the question of what it actually means to be American, to revive that self-confidence again. And Tommy, I'm running because I think it has to be an outsider. It has to be somebody that isn't a product of that broken system itself. And that's what I'm hoping to deliver all the way to the White House.
Well, it sounds good to me. I agree with you on all the points that you've made. I want to turn to another issue that unfortunately hasn't really gotten the coverage that it deserves, and that's our southern border. At Fox News, we send Bill Maloogian, we send Griff Jenkins, we send all of our fleet down there to try to expose what's happening and get the American people to understand. The Fox News audience understands, the conservative audience understands. I don't think the American people at large really understand what's going on down there. I want to play a clip of our Senator Ted Cruz addressing this week and then get your thoughts on the other side. Let's take a listen.
And I will tell you, the men and women of the Border Patrol, they've never had a political leader undermine them. They despise you, Mr. Secretary, because you're willing to let children be raped to follow political orders. This is a crisis. It's a disgrace. And you won't even admit this human tragedy is a crisis.
What the senator said was revolting. I'm not going to address it.
Your refusal to do your job is revolting.
So this has been an ongoing conversation. We know what's going on at the border. We know the open border Biden policy. We know that your opponent, Donald Trump, was one of the first people to make this a national issue that people cared about. So heading into 2024, how would you address this very important issue and maybe even get some independents and even some Democrats on your side with it?
So look, I actually want to go further than Trump ever wanted to go, but I think we can also do it in a way that unifies the country if we do it from a strong moral foundation, from a position of moral authority. So what do I mean? I don't think building the wall alone is enough. I don't even think that's going to be sufficiently effective anymore. I think we need to build the wall and, yes, use the U.S. military to secure the Swiss cheese that is our southern border today. It is a completely porous border. I think it is a perfectly legitimate use of the military, both under international law, domestic law, and ethical norms, to use our own military to secure our own border. If we can use it to secure somebody else's border, we can absolutely use it to secure our own. And Tommy, the funny fact is, that is a controversial thing to say in the modern national security establishment. But I believe standing on moral authority, standing on American principles, I think that's a perfectly good use of U.S. military force to actually secure our border. And even to go a step further, to end the fentanyl crisis. That's actually one of the great costs. You want to talk about costs to human life on American soil. 100,000 plus deaths per year due to fentanyl, most of which is crossing our Swiss cheese of a southern border. And you know what? That's about 50 times the number of people that died on 9/11 each year, dying on American soil, directly as a consequence of largely Chinese manufactured or Chinese supplied fentanyl that they actually manufacture synthetically south of the border that the drug cartels are now pumping into the United States. I refuse to stand by as just an idle bystander, as the current president, President Biden, is doing, and watch that kill 100,000 Americans on our own soil. If you're going to use the U.S. military, the number one use case is to protect Americans on our own soil, on our own home turf. And again, that's going much further than President Trump ever did. But I'm willing to go there, take that America First agenda to the next level. But I think we can do it, as you asked, in a way that brings even independents and some Democrats and some apolitical people with us, if we're doing it from a strong moral foundation, which makes the case from first principles rather than just, tearing up the system for the sake of shaking it up. There's a role for that, and I respect Trump for it. But now to take it to the next level, I think in many ways like Reagan did in the 1980s, we have to do it from a moral foundation with moral authority on principled ground. And that's actually the whole premise of my campaign. That's exactly what we're doing. And that's what will empower us to take that America First agenda to its true logical extension.
Oh, I agree. I think, again, you're right. People don't want to address the fact that we're not protecting our border because the thought of somehow sending our military to protect our own borders is so off-putting for some people that see it as militant. Well, it is, because we need to protect and defend our country. We also need to look at some of the asylum laws and other things that are allowing these people to get in under false pretenses and then stay in this country and really run roughshod, do whatever they want, have 5 kids by the time they have an actual hearing. But I want to move on now to Trump and DeSantis, right? So that's been the biggest part of this whole conversation headed up to 2024. You've already got a competitor in Donald Trump. We don't yet have an announcement from Ron DeSantis. But I wonder, with those two heavyweights in this race, how do you plan to address them, whether it's now or whether it's the primary season, the debates? How are you going to tackle a personality as big as Trump? And then if DeSantis were to get into the race, that's another big personality you got to contend with.
I mean, DeSantis is effectively running a shadow campaign already, so let's just call that spade a spade. We can get into the details of that. Here's what I view. I think it is a two-person race. I think it's between Donald Trump and myself. I think that the way it works is we need a political outsider in the White House. That is the new tradition and will be the new tradition of the Republican Party. We cannot be the party of the professional politician, of the career politician. You want Joe Biden? Great. That's what you get from the other party. In our party, I think it's fine to have some career politicians in Congress or the Senate, or maybe in foot soldiers in individual seats as governors. I think Ron DeSantis has been a fine governor, been a good governor in Florida. But I think when you're talking about reviving a missing national identity, you're just not going to get it from a professional career politician who's beholden to the donor class. Note the silence after the Silicon Valley bailout. Note the silence, even with respect to the use of police power to potentially indict a member of the opposition party. I think Ron DeSantis, has revealed, and it's not just him, it's any career politician, they're beholden to their donor class. In my case, I didn't ring a tin can asking donors for permission to run. I'm speaking truth, hard truths, in many cases, unapologetically, even going further than President Trump ever did, tackling affirmative action, something that Trump could have addressed but did not, tackling the climate cult, saying that we're going to abandon that. I think I could go on and on with respect to how we can take the America First agenda to the next level. But I think this is a two-horse race between the two people who are not professional politicians, but true outsiders and have actually succeeded in the world outside of politics. I certainly have, even by the age of 37. I've built multi-billion-dollar businesses from scratch and achieved independence. That's what this race comes down to. Now, between Trump and myself, I said it earlier to you, Tommy, I think that I can take this the distance even further than Trump did, building on his foundation, admittedly, but doing so with moral authority, reviving a national identity, to put America first. We need to rediscover what America is. And I'm running on a campaign to rediscover that missing national identity, the first principles that set this nation into motion in 1776. And if we do that, I don't think we have to be some nation in an inevitable national decline. I don't think we have to be Rome or Carthage. I think we're just a little young, going through our version of adolescence, figuring out who we really are. And I'm leading the process of getting to that answer with conviction. And that will allow us to take that policy agenda of America First to its fullest extent, actually fire the managerial bureaucrats and shut down the government agencies that stopped Donald Trump from doing his work. I will follow through and do it with constitutional conviction and with personal conviction, and most importantly, with moral conviction, a moral foundation that we've lost in this country. As a father of two kids, as the kid of two parents in a stable family or immigrants who came to this country, I think I'm unapologetic about bringing back the family foundation, the faith-based foundation of this country. We can't forget that in a conservative movement either. That's actually part of the foundation that allows us to go even further.
Well, a lot of the things that you're saying, I agree with. I think it's going to be a battle for 2024. I hope the Republican Party doesn't splinter itself so much that it allows for an inevitable Democrat to get into that White House again. But I appreciate everything that you're saying. Best of luck to you. You know, you and I have been on Outnumbered, I believe, a couple of times together. I've always appreciated your work, always appreciated your eloquence, your effectiveness, and your communication. So best of luck to you, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Tommy. Good to see you again.